Hello and welcome back to the channel where once again it's time for some more Saturn versus PlayStation action. If you tuned in last time, you will see that Destruction Derby came out on top on the PlayStation, tying the series at 6 wins apiece as we head into the 13th episode. Now, today I picked a game which I believe was the only 3D platformer that saw a release on both systems, so I thought it would be an ideal one to look at. It came out in September on the PS1 in 1997, followed by an October release a couple of weeks later on the Saturn. I'm talking about Croc, Legend of the Gobbos. Now, if you've watched my other videos too, you'll see that for games that came out on both systems that were 3D, the Saturn has not fared well. Hardcore 4x4 came out on top on the PS1. Tomb Raider came out on top on the PS1, and so did Destruction Derby. So it's a real big challenge today for the Saturn to see if it can really live with the PlayStation in the world of 3D. So this week we're going to start with the Saturn first in the looks department, and without a doubt Croc is one of the best looking 3D games on the system. I said it when I reviewed it quite a long time back. I stand by it now. Everything about Croc on the Saturn looks really decent. The character model Croc himself looks good. The enemies look decent. The textures and all of the levels look good. The 3D levels themselves look good. There isn't really any issues with the way that Croc looks on the Saturn. It's definitely more presentable than a lot of the other 3D games that we've looked at, games like Hardcore 4x4 and Destruction Derby. It looks really nice, and it runs pretty good as well. There's only minor bits of slowdown within the whole entire game, so I think overall Croc is a really decent looking game on the system. The lava actually looks quite good on the Saturn. It looks better on the Saturn than the PlayStation actually. So overall in the looks department, Croc is a pretty good looking 3D game on the Saturn. So moving on to the PlayStation version for looks, and the first thing you may well notice is the fact the viewable screen size on the PS1 version is considerably larger, it's wider, and it's taller as well. I don't really know why the Saturn viewable screen size is such a fair bit less, but it does affect it because you've got far more viewable screen area on the PlayStation 1 version. Another thing you'll notice is the colours look more natural on the PlayStation version. They look more kind of artificial, I think, on the Saturn version, and I do prefer the PlayStation colour scheme. Textures are more visible because they're actually brighter and easier to see on the PlayStation version. They're not really much higher quality than the Saturn, and overall the graphical quality between the two games is actually quite similar. Like I said, the lava doesn't quite look as good on the PS1 version, but I do think the PS1 version runs slightly better overall. It's really close, but I have noticed odd bits of slowdown on the Saturn version that I haven't noticed on the PlayStation version, and I have played both versions of these games extensively. I have. So overall it's really close, but due to the color and the fact the game looks slightly more appealing on the PlayStation, it means the PlayStation version comes out on top in the looks department. So moving on to the sound effects and music, and there really is absolutely nothing between the games here. I've played both of these games extensively, like I said, and I have found no differences, no discrepancies, nothing at all to separate the two games within the sound department. Now, when I reviewed the Saturn version, I said Croc has got some really nice tunes and they all fit the environment so well. So, as there really is nothing between the two, what I'm going to do is play you a few tracks just so you can take in how good the soundtrack is for Croc. So moving on to gameplay next, and I'm not going to talk about them separately really because both games play incredibly similar. Croc has all the same abilities on both games: jump, butt smash, tail swipe, changing the camera, moving him around with the D-pad. It's very, very similar. Both games can use analog support as well, although I'll always say the PlayStation's analog controller is vastly superior to the Saturn. In fact, from playing the game extensively on both systems, it's really, really difficult to come up with any differences in the way that they play. But I am going to say one thing. I feel Croc is slightly more responsive on the PlayStation. And I came to this decision when, after playing the PlayStation version for the footage and then playing the Saturn one after, I seem to mistime button presses for jumps on the Saturn far more. And that is just because I felt he's not quite as responsive to control. He's not on the Saturn. It's only minor, and it's really a minuscule difference. I mean, you can adjust to it, obviously, but when you're going from one version to the other straight away, it is actually something that you notice. And for this reason, it means the PlayStation version comes out on top in the gameplay department. So moving on to content and lifespan, and again, I don't need to talk about the games individually here because what we have got is a game that is exactly the same on both systems in terms of the content and the lifespan, because all of the levels are exactly the same. It's got the same number of everything really between both versions, same number of Gobbos to rescue, same number of secret levels. Everything is identical from what I can tell in terms of content, and it's pretty much just as enjoyable to play from one system to the other, apart from the really minor differences that I picked out. So you've got a great lengthy adventure really. It doesn't matter which version you play for that. Both games will take you quite a while to complete. But of course, this does mean in the content and lifespan department, it is a draw this week. Now, the keen-eyed people will notice I've not pointed out every single difference between both versions of the game. Things like the title screen being slightly different, the fact Croc walks across the screen for a loading time on the PlayStation. The Saturn version actually does load about half a second quicker, but these things don't affect the enjoyment of the game for me, and they're not really something that I'm ever going to take into consideration when I'm comparing two versions of a game. I think when I look at the two versions of the game, it really just boils down to a few minor things. Like I said, the colours are more natural on the PlayStation, and I find them more appealing, slightly better lit areas as well. I think it just shines slightly more for the PlayStation in this regard. As well as that, screen size is obviously bigger on the PlayStation. I've said it for a few games as well. It's frustrating. You've got more viewable screen size on the PlayStation, which instantly makes it more appealing in my eyes. And the only other slightly minuscule difference, I think, is the fact that I said Croc does feel slightly more responsive and better to control on the PlayStation. It's really minuscule, and if you've only played one version of the game, it's not something you're going to notice. But playing them back to back, I noticed it, and it is just something that slightly goes in favour of the PlayStation, which does mean overall this week the PlayStation version is the winner, which means the PlayStation is now 1 point ahead, 7 points to 6 in the series after week 13. I'm just going to give you a spoiler. My next comparison review will probably be the one that a lot of people have mentioned they want to see on the channel. I'm not going to say the games directly. I'll let people guess down below, but I imagine it won't take long for people to figure out which two games I'm talking about. Hopefully, that is going to be my next one. As always, let me know your thoughts on these two games down below, which one you think is the better version. And as always, I'll be back in the near future with another comparison video. Goodbye for now.